watched Sunita Gupta, who is the Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology at Oxford University, being interviewed on Lockdown TV on YouTube. And during the interview, she made this answer to a question, or part of an answer to a question, which I think is probably one of the more important statements ever made to do with the coronavirus. And I'll just read it out. On May the 21st, Sunita Gupta, who's the Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology at Oxford University, was interviewed on Lockdown TV. Sunita Gupta is the professor who put a counter-argument to that of Professor Neil Ferguson. It caused a fair bit of controversy at the time. But this is a quote from the interview, which runs, the interview ran for half an hour. The truth is that lockdown is a luxury, and it's a luxury that the middle classes are enjoying and the higher income countries are enjoying at the expense of the poor, the vulnerable and the less developed countries. And I think it is a very serious crisis. And to think of it simply in terms of, is this epidemic going to be over or not, is really unconscionable. Unreasonable. And nobody seems to have picked it up. Well, I've just been watching this Dominic Cummings business on television. One of the headings in this morning's newspaper was Howls of Rage. Now, whether he was right or wrong to take the action which he did, and he's just given a statement about it now, it strikes me as being a sort of foolish thing to do, given his situation. Now, I don't know the fellow from Adam, and for some people he's absolutely obnoxious, and he's made an awful lot of enemies. Other people think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. However, if you make lots of enemies, then you are there to be shot at, and he should have realised that. However, he seems to have been given the wholehearted backing of the Prime Minister. Whereas others are screaming for him to be sacked or screaming for him to resign, which he obviously shows no intention of doing. The problem is that he knows an awful lot. He knows the insider story. Who said what, who did what, who was for, who was against, who was rowing with whom, what strategies were considered. And when you have someone with that kind of knowledge, to use the old adage, you want them inside the tent peeing out. You don't want them outside the tent peeing in. So you have to play the long game. I think that he will gradually be eased out of decision-making processes. His influence will become less and less and less until it becomes irrelevant. How long that will take, I've no idea. But eventually, I think what will happen is he will quite quietly move on. is obviously a person who enjoys the influence he has over the Tory party and the government. And when that's gone, then his reason for being there will have disappeared, and he will go. I mean, one of the things I've noticed over the past probably, I don't know, 10, 20 years, is that impetuosity seems to rule, rather than sitting down, letting things calm down and then rationally thinking about what to do, what decisions to make, what strategies to employ. People, and indeed governments, rush into things which they should have considered in far more detail. In our case, of course, the Iraq War was probably the worst. I mean, wherever you've got lives being lost, then obviously decisions should have been considered. Then obviously there has to be some great justification for it. I mean, the Iraqi people wanted rid of Saddam Hussein, you know, and his family, a sort of secret police run by his sons. But they had schooling, they had good public health, they had universities, and what have they got now? 7,000 square miles of bomb site, and power struggles going on everywhere. And it was the same in Libya. They wanted rid of Gaddafi. Well, they got rid of Gaddafi. What have they got now? Civil war. The country is ruined. One of the richest countries in Africa, with its oil and gas reserves. A disaster. The same going on in Yemen. Another disaster. The same happened in Ukraine when they forced Yanukovych out of office, rather than waiting a couple of years for the democratic vote when they could have got rid of him, which resulted in Russia taking Crimea, a massive chunk of Ukraine, and of course they've got a war in the east of the country, in the Donbass, and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in that war, and it's still going on. I mean, I can remember having a conversation on holiday once in Egypt with a chap who absolutely loathed President Mubarak as an autocratic leader, and I remember saying to him, be careful what you wish for here. And of course what happened when Mubarak was deposed was he ended up with a Muslim Brotherhood who were even worse, and then they were deposed by the military led by a chap called Sisi, General Sisi, and he resigned and declared himself president. And this year he's just imposed sort of worse conditions than even Mubarak. So it pays not to be impetuous, it pays to play the long game. Also in the news this week, although it disappeared very quickly, is a good example of playing the long game. And it's in Hong Kong. China imposed a regulation in Hong Kong, I can't remember when it was, last year, and it resulted in tremendous riots and taking over of the university, and lots of violence between students, police and agents of China. Probably the military dressed up as police, but who knows, we'll never know. But of course, once the riot had been subdued, there were obviously going to be repercussions, but they didn't come immediately. The long game came into effect. And of course, whilst all this coronavirus business is going on, which emanated from China, the Chinese have subtly imposed far more stringent conditions on Hong Kong. Again, another case of be careful what you wish for. That isn't to say that you should accept all these things feebly, but being impetuous historically tends to get you nowhere. Anyway, the Dominic Cummings business, of course, is sort of nothing compared with world politics. I mean, China is playing a long game everywhere, lending money to third world countries for building railways and football stadia and opening mines, and it's all in their own interests. But of course, once this money has been loaned, then these countries are obligated to China. And if you think it's something which is happening elsewhere, it's happening here. Lots of Chinese companies are buying up British businesses, or taking a large portion of the shareholding in British businesses. I mean, the northeast of England, they get their water from Northumbrian water. You couldn't get a more local name than Northumbrian water for Northumbria. But of course, it's part owned by the Chinese. I mean, I always find it amusing that these people who are whinging on about China, all the technical stuff which they're using, the cameras, the TV screens, the computers, they're all Chinese. And if they aren't built by the Chinese, then they're built using components from China. Without the Chinese, we'd be in a real mess. But more worrying is that the Chinese are rapidly increasing their military capability. I mean, they've got the biggest army in the world for a start, but they're building several aircraft carriers. And we've built 2 aircraft carriers, but we don't have any airplanes to put on them. Their air force has got state-of-the-art Chinese-built fighters and bombers. I mean, the fighters look remarkably like the American F-fighters. I mean, what's it all for? Do you need aircraft carriers for defence? They've obviously got some long-term plan. One of the most impetuous people on the planet is the leader of the so-called free world, the President of the United States. A more impetuous person you've never come across. But impetuosity is not what you want in a president of probably the most powerful nation in the world. I mean, he's the man with his finger on the button. But when he comes out with injected himself with disinfectant to cure this coronavirus, you have to wonder what planet he's on. I mean, what these people standing behind him think of it, I have no idea. So this Cummings business, which is taking over the newspapers, taking over the television, is almost an irrelevance. This time next week, it will be forgotten about, except by those who had wished to depose him and failed. Anyway, it's a lovely evening. It's probably time to go out and cast a few flies into the water and see if we can get an obliging trout. Anyway, take care. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.